Welcome to the Chase MedSearch Podcast, the place where we dive deep into the medical device sales industry by discussing the current trends, timeless philosophies, and amazing experiences that shape our niche of the industry. Join me, Jordan Chase, on a guided tour as I speak with established sales leaders and professionals as they share stories that will help you get in, stay in, and thrive in your medical device sales career. Let's start the show. Chase MedSearch Podcast. Excited to be doing this episode today with Travis McCoy, who is my guest. He's the founder of Q3 Consulting and Coaching. Travis is a former collegiate athlete, a record breaker in sales at 2 Fortune 500 companies, and a medical sales rep for 11 years at Boston Scientific and winner of the prestigious President's Club 10 times, and recorded the accomplishment of being the #1 revenue producer for the company 7 times, and his territory was cut 6 times. He's here to share some secrets about his success, and he's written a book called Authentic Sales, Selling with Purpose and Strategy. It's available on Amazon, and it's available on Audible, and we're here to talk about that. Welcome to the Chase MedSearch Podcast, Travis.
Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate it. I've been looking forward to getting on ever since you reached out to me and invited me, so thank you.
I'm glad to have you on. It's great. We know a lot of people in common, and I'm just excited. We've chatted outside this environment, this podcast environment before, and it's been great. So I'm glad you're on. You've written a book.
Yes, I have.
And it's available, as I mentioned, on Amazon and Audible. Why should someone buy and read or listen to your book?
That is a good question. That book took me 5 years to write. So it is... at Boston Scientific, I was there for 20 years. First 11, I was selling, and you were sharing some of my early accolades. If I was to walk off stage when receiving those awards and you were to say, what did you do to win those awards? I didn't have I gave people answers. I work harder. I know my product. I always had answers, but I didn't really know. 9 years ago when I went international, and as I was supporting all the countries outside the U.S., I started to see what the best reps do across different countries with various cultures. So there's some very large cultural differences, but the best reps across all countries do the same thing. And I started to see that common denominator amongst those reps. And I started to take notes and really try to flush it out to see if it was true. And then I would share best practices with another country, and I would see those reps start to improve. And that's where the birth of that book came from. It is not just how I sold. It's what I observed the best reps around the world selling.
I love it. It's a distillation of your career and your observations of other great reps.
Yes. Yeah. Because if your personality fits my personality, then sure, I could help mentor you to be a better salesperson. But prior to me observing the best reps around the world, if your personality did not match mine, I would have been giving you something that might not fit your style. And that brings me to the second point I want to make is, why buy my book? If you find yourself role-playing with your company's sales process and it just doesn't fit your personality, it doesn't fit your style, something's off, you feel uncomfortable going in front of everybody, doing the role plays, or you just feel a little uncomfortable, and you find yourself in the field changing it up a little bit, but that actually works for you, buy my book. Because my book is all about finding the authentic you. And the sales process that I introduce in is more like guardrails, helping you find your strengths and lean on your strengths and actually work away from your weaknesses. Focusing on your weaknesses to make them your strengths, hey, go right ahead, do it. But don't do it in front of your customer. Go do that on your spare time or on your downtime. When you're with your customer, lean on your strengths. There's a reason they like you. There's a reason you're in there. There's a reason somebody hired you. You lean on those strengths and use those. And those differ from person to person. Yeah.
You had some great examples early in your book about, how much you do not appreciate stringent, non-conforming, ineffective sales processes that are implemented through, unrealistic simulated role plays, which, depending on the company you work for, those can be in vogue. Everybody, the idea is great, sort of in a lab that everybody will do it the exact same way. But your experience in the field is much different than that.
Absolutely. So we get in the role plays, and yes, we want to push people out of their comfort levels. And I agree. If we're going to push them out of their comfort levels, it's back at the home office when we're training, at the initial sales training, or in the office when we're just practicing, or national sales meeting. Yes, let's push them out of the comfort zone. But I'd say 8 out of 10 times when I'm riding with a rep in the US or outside the US, and I observe them in front of their customer, they ditch that sales process and they go with their own. Now you might see a couple things that resemble the sales process, but the order or the way they go about it is they go with what's comfortable to them.
Mm-hmm.
They ditch it. So why are we focusing all this time in something that they're gonna ditch? And it's frustrating. I feel that some of these books, and I would love to challenge somebody on this. I feel that some of these sales processes and books are written in a way that when they introduce it to your team looks like they're fumbling all over themselves and don't do it to where for the management says, oh my gosh, we really need to hire this company to come in and consult to really train our reps so that they can do this sales process.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like some of these books and sales processes are creating job security for themselves because they come in and they sell the vision to the upper management, because upper management is always looking for a reason, or looking for a tool to sell more. They bring them in, they start to do some of these role plays. The sales reps are fumbling all over themselves. The role plays are not going smooth. Consulting firm says, yeah, we probably need to spend a little bit more time with your team, work on them, whatever. So it's like, to me, it's like a never ending job security where, hey, let's come on in and just make your reps feel comfortable out of the gate.
Pretty early in your book, you talk about at the heart of the book is the essence of communication and the profound act of helping, which are two pillars that form the bedrock of our lives. Unfold that a little bit. That's a little philosophical for sales, but I like it.
Yeah. So one, I chose the word articulate. So it's SALES is my sales process. S stands for strategize. Just get your thoughts together. You can strategize for days with multiple people, or there's tons of good reps that will just gather their thoughts in the parking lot, grab their one pager, look over their notes and go in. So as long as you're doing something, that's strategizing. Now, depending on your product, your situation, your knowledge, your skill set, I would tell you, hey, you probably need to do a little bit more. And in some cases, you probably need to do a little bit less. Stop researching everything on the internet. You're wasting your time. You're probably going to go in and just be told that they're not going to see you. So that's the strategize. The A is articulate. And this goes with what your question was, communication. The reason why I use the word articulate, a lot of times when we're sharing information or trying to identify some information, we're telling, we're teaching, we're presenting. I believe that we need to be sharing our information in a way that they receive it. And what does that look like? Well, it changes person to person, depending on how much attention they're giving you, depending on their background, their knowledge. So the word articulate is defined by me saying something in a way that you receive it, not just presenting, not just teaching. Because I could teach it, then you didn't catch it all and I move on, but I did a wonderful job. I go out in the parking lot, I call my boss, my sales manager, and I say, went great. Why'd it go great? Because Travis did a wonderful job presenting and I didn't stutter and I pronounced everything correctly. But that's not true communication. Communication is where I am sharing something and you are receiving. And you can not be receiving maybe because of your knowledge, or it could be because you're stressed out. If you're a neurosurgeon and you just walked out of the ICU because you got a patient that you had surgery on yesterday and they're having an adverse reaction to either the surgery or some post-op drugs, and I'm trying to teach you something, you might not receive anything. But I'm going to believe you did because I said everything perfect. So articulating and communicating is so important. Then the second half of that, active listening, learning, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm teaching a class now at Southeastern Louisiana University, and I have just a group of amazing students. Love them to death. They're 300 level, so they're it's an elective. They chose to be in this class, and they are all present. And I just absolutely love them. And one of the things that we just discussed last class was, in your heart, you need to just get a feel, like have a hunger and a desire and seek to know, are you going to put them in a better place than when you first met them? And then if you can put a measurement behind that, if you can quantify that, then you know where you to put your price and you understand everything. So meaning like if I find out it's not just finding out a little pain point and then twisting the dagger in you to make this little pain point seem like it's really bad, but it's hearing a pain point, but then searching for another one that might even be bigger than that one, and then trying to get an understanding if that is the biggest one, and then how big is it, and then quantifying it, and then understanding that the solution I'm going to bring is going to be a 10x benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know that unless you truly, truly have a desire to really understand. Too many times I watch reps, they'll seek for any pain point and then they'll just dive in on it. Or this is the one I cringe seeing. They seek for a predetermined one and they'll have leading questions while they're qualifying to find that predetermined one and then jump all in on it. So, a doctor with great hands gets good outcomes no matter the product. So if you get him to admit that there was like the outcome wasn't perfectly desirable on the last patient or whatever, and your solution is going to beat it, then you're jumping all in on a pain point that's not that big to them. Where if you would take the time and identify that his problem's actually in reimbursement, that let's say SI joint that he's using is no longer being supported because the codes, ICD-10 and CPT codes get rewritten every year.
Mm-hmm.
The code is now asking for, something to be transfixed. And then all of a sudden what he was using was that, but you've identified that it was the billing issue, or maybe billing's not an issue. Maybe he's only legal cases and private insurance and billing is not an issue for him. So it'd be outcomes. It's just trying to figure out which one's the best. But a lot of companies will teach their reps that there's a predetermined one. They go and they chase that one. And that's not it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sounds like you're talking about more customization to the customer.
Yeah. And I feel sometimes when you're too stringent on your process, you miss the ability to customize.
Your book is chock full of information, and there's a lot of value on every page, and some of the stories are just quite enjoyable because you dive into real life situations where you're competing against people. And in one instance, I know exactly who that person was. You didn't write their name down, but it was very easy for me, who's been around for a long time, to know who that person was you're competing against. You talk about the one superpower that every salesperson should wish they had, and it's not in a comic book. What's that superpower?
Yeah, this is funny. If I could back up just a little bit, that superpower, I used to go around and teach. So I'd do workshops, I'd go down to Japan, Australia, and I would do workshops. And I used to love asking that question. If you could have any superpower, what superpower would you have to be the best rep in the world? And what this did for me, Jordan, was it allowed me to get a little insight into their thought process.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to essentially show them the path. And for years, I was doing it wrong. And finally, somebody challenged me, and I have actually changed that. So what got put in the book is the new one. But for years, I had a different one that I would do. But I would have reps answer, be in two places at the same time. Okay, it's a good answer. And then some people would say, to be able to know what the person is thinking. Like, that's awesome. That's not it. If someone says they want to be in two places at the same time, then they're thinking service-wise. They're thinking service burden. They might be reactive, mm-hmm. right? They're not thinking proactively. Reading their mind, that's good too. And I would challenge them. I said, okay, go ahead, read my mind. My mind is my wife's sorority sister is the other neuromodulation rep. So there you go. You read my mind. I'm not going to be able to use your product. And that is a true story. And you've probably heard of numerous other situations that are similar. So where's reading your mind going to get you? And I try to get them to understand. And then finally, it was somebody that said, it's trust. The faster you can get somebody to trust you, that's the superpower you want to have. Now let's peel back the layers of trust. What does trust mean? People always think of trust as positive. Well, what if I can trust that you're always going to be late to a meeting? What if I can trust that you're always late to surgery? Trust is being able to depend on you. And then the depending can either be positive or negative. So how can we get customers to start to trust us? Well, they don't want surprises. They want to see who you are repetitively, and that you don't, that you're not all over the place, and that you're not Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
So they really want to be able to trust you. And the sooner you can build up that trust comes from repetitive, positive behavior will be the type of trust we're looking for. And how do you do that? Well, you got to keep coming by. Well, how do you keep coming by if they don't want to see you, or if they say, hey, yeah, we're not going to use your product? And that brings me to the main point of my book, is figuring out reasons to return.
Mm-hmm.
How do you keep coming by so that you can demonstrate that? It's human psychology is crazy. If you're in the gym and you're always in the gym at, let's say you're working pharmaceutical hours and you're in the gym at 2:00 in the afternoon because you finished your lunch and you're able to go into the gym. So you're in the gym and there's somebody there you don't recognize. You're not going to leave your phone on the bench while you go get some water. You're going to take it with you. But now you come in there every day at 2:00 and you see that same person working out every day at 2:00. After just seeing them, not talking to them, not getting their name or understanding where they're from, you start to feel comfortable. You trust that you can leave your phone on that bench while you go get some water. Why is that? Well, you haven't observed them steal anybody else's phone. You repetitively seen them. There's just a comfort there. And then all of a sudden you start to build trust. Not saying it's right, but it's just true. So you coming by and coming by and coming by. I've heard of some of the best stories of reps of which they just wouldn't stop coming by. I've lost to that. To show some humility. I lost. There was a doctor down in the boot of Louisiana, and he absolutely loved Leah. Leah was the A&S rep, which got bought by St. Jude, which got bought by Abbott.
Mm-hmm.
He loved her. Said she was there when no one else was, whatever. So I would go down there and I would show new technology, and I would drop in every once in a while just to keep him in the loop of new technology. And he was just consistent. I'm not leaving Leah. It's like, hey, no problem. I'm just keep coming down here in case something happens. And he one day said, look, don't come back until something happens to Leah. So the day that Leah was no longer with them, I raced in and he said, no, I'm going to, I appreciate you coming by, but I'm going to try Medtronic next. And I was like, why? And he said, well, they kept coming by. I said, you told them not to, right? He goes, yeah. I said, let me get this straight. I honored you and didn't come by. He ignored you and came by, and you're going to give, he goes, well, if you put it that way, yeah, I guess so. I was like, okay. So just change my mentality. It's just like, you don't have to be aggressive, but keep coming by because they want to see that.
Mm-hmm.
So in his eyes, when Leah was gone, who did he trust that was going to be there in a time of need? The other guy, the Medtronic rep.
Mm.
So yeah, it's just, I hope somebody receives that one. And even when a doctor says, don't come by anymore, you don't want to bother them, but find a creative way to stay in front of them and stay relevant, which goes back to what my book's about. Find you a reason to return.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you also spend some time unfolding is the prize you're after is behavior change. You're trying to change the behavior of the doctor.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, another great chapter is elite professionals. I love this chapter because you name names of people that you're impressed with and have worked with, and then you create pseudonyms for competitors. There's some great stories in there. And you do it through a kind of a framework of attributes. And the first one was humility. And there's a guy named Robbie Leininger.
Yeah.
And you learned a lot from him, even though he was quite junior to you.
Yes.
Tell us about Robbie in the context of humility and how that was quite a weapon in his arsenal.
God, and this kid has every reason not to show humility. I mean, every reason. He held the record at LSU for sprinter in the pool. So he's a swimmer, and he had the 50-meter record. Tall, strong, handsome, just a great kid. His sister was one of my very first clinical specialists, and then I was heavily trying to recruit him to join Advanced Bionics Boston Scientific too. And when he came to work with us, I mean, he just possessed everything. He had already sold big dollar items. Like I think he came from selling some equipment to yachts. So he was calling on big yacht manufacturers. So I mean, even sales wise, he was a polished sales guy. And he took the back seat like Steve Young did to Joe Montana. He took the back seat to a rep in Jacksonville, Florida, and he was humble about it. And so many reps, Jordan, you probably hear it all the time about how junior reps say they're doing all the work. And sometimes it could be true, and sometimes not.
Mhm.
And weeding through those is difficult. He never complained. He never said anything. He was just great. And then fast forward, it was his time to take over, and he started just crushing it like we all knew he would, just killing it. One of Boston's best reps. And when I would go to cadaver labs with him, there would be some young reps that were starting to just get a taste of success, and they would share how they're doing it, and Robbie would lean in. Everybody else would dismiss him, and Robbie would lean in and say, hey, why do you think that worked? And they would say it. And I will be honest, the first time I heard him do it, I thought he was making fun. But it wasn't long before, well, that conversation, he didn't embarrass a person, but then he did it again, and he did it again. I was like, man, God, Robbie's really like, he's really leaning into these people. Not only is he empowering them and making them feel good and feeling heard. So when these junior reps and also young senior reps, when they walk away, they just remember how great that Robbie made them feel while they were talking. But Robbie wasn't just doing it to fluff them up, make them feel good about themselves. He really did care, and he was picking through pearls, because later I asked him, why you always, it was a longer conversation, but basically asking him why he's always asking what they do to be successful. And he goes, dude, I've actually implemented some things those young reps say. It's stuff I never would have thought to do. And he goes, in a nice way, when people don't know what they don't know. And sometimes those are the people that are, as competitors, sometimes those are the dangerous ones, right? Because they don't know what they don't know. And in a good way, they're the dangerous ones. I don't mean anything like they're hurting people. They become a dangerous competitor because they don't know that they should not be calling on your account. They don't know that they should not be asking that question to the physician, and they end up just doing it, and it works out for them. So yeah, I learned a lot from watching Robbie, and then I started to inherit that. And I did that before I went international. So that was very helpful, because when I went international, I started to implement the Robbie Leilinger approach.
If I could weigh in with some commentary here real quick, just piggybacking off your comments and observations. A handful of times each year, very experienced, very competent, and very accomplished neuromodulation reps get their heads absolutely taken off in the interview process by young junior rep types, because those people are so hungry to get to the next level. And it's happened recently a couple times here. And I always warn, because I deal with all levels of reps, and sometimes a position you can have someone who's somewhat junior interviewing against a way more experienced and accomplished person. I'll warn that experienced person. I'll say, look, the only way that you guys ever lose these jobs in an interview process is to someone that's more hungry and has a somewhat comparable skill set. And it has happened this year, I think more this year than I've ever seen, where that junior person shows up dressed to the nines. They have multiple copies of their resume. They've got a business plan, and they're sitting down, and they have done everything they can do to research that job. They have talked to people. They have hunted them down that work at that company and gone on LinkedIn and messaged them and done everything they can possibly do. And when you get that behind you and you sit down and interview, and the senior person has not done those things, I tell you, it can happen. And I've seen it a handful of times this year. And it's somewhat shocking when it happens to me. But then when I sit back and lean back and really think about it, it isn't that shocking. This person's hungrier. And I think that kind of relates to what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's so tough. If you don't mind, I'd love to share a story. When I came from Edward Jones, amazing company, ethical, but boy, do they make you learn to cold call, right? Knocking on doors, selling stocks and bonds. It doesn't get any worse than that. You can tell me about your vacuum sales days or solar panel sales days, whatever. I'm asking for people's 401k information on their doorstep. Like it doesn't get any more difficult than selling stocks and bonds door to door. When I left there, that was the training. As I look back, it's like, wow, God, thank you for this pathway. It all makes sense now. As my wife holds that check up and that gut-wrenching feeling of me feeling like a failure as a man, as a father, when I went to Boston or Advanced Phonics and Don Shields got me that opportunity, and Mike Doherty, and they hired me. They took a gamble. It was also Hap Peterson was in on that interview, and they took a gamble. And I sat in that initial sales training class. We did not have FDA approval yet. The company was small. The owner, Al Mann, was still there. Jeff Greiner, Tony Arnold, all these wonderful leaders were there. It was a small company, Advanced Phonics, had nothing to do with Boston Scientific. I sat in that room, Jordan, with a grateful heart. I sat there just wanting to prove myself, but I was just so thankful. My base salary was twice as much of what I was making. Actually, more like 3 times as much. The other people they hired, some came from competitors, some came from spine. And I will say this, they may have been better. They were definitely more knowledgeable than me. They could role play way better than me. But they didn't have the grateful heart that I had. They weren't thankful for being there. They felt like they gave something up and took a step down to come there in hopes that they will make more money because it's a new company waiting to get FDA approval.
Mm-hmm.
So when they took off the handcuffs and we got FDA approval and we went out and sold, I had half a territory. Poor Chuck Gross. Love the guy to death. He's a great guy. He's still in the industry and he's amazing. But basically, I talked them into kind of cutting his territory in half. So we had the 2 smallest territories in the whole United States. And poor, too, because our cost of wage index is so low in Louisiana. So I finished that first year of selling, I finished number 2 to a guy that was taller, stronger, faster. He was like a wide receiver for Brigham Young University. And this guy was a stud, so polish. The role plays, I mean, I think they were recording his role play to show as examples. This guy was just amazing. Mm-hmm. He finished number 1 first year. I finished number 2. I sat in that room seeing him get that reward. And I was like, that will never happen again. There's no way he's going to beat me next year. Year number 2, I was number 1 by $2 million. So I think I was $5.5 million. And number 2 place was $3.5 million. So I was by a substantial amount in the beginning. I think I was like 15, 20% of the whole revenue of the company at the time in the beginning. And then they started to cut my territory and then I would grow it back and they cut my territory. I still to this day hold the record at Boston Scientific for the most territory cuts by one person. So my territory is cut 6 times. I think the most was either 2, maybe 3. And then one thing that I'm kind of real excited about and why I feel that I can help others is they cut my territory 6. 5 of those people that they take your best clinical specialists and they turn them into their own territory and they give your most loyal doctor so that they don't have to sell that much. They get those individuals went off and even grew it more. Mm-hmm. Took a loyal doctor, but they even went and grew more territory and they made President's Club. So 5 out of 6 people that I hired, trained, mentored, they went on to make President's Club. And that's something I'm excited about.
Passing it on. There's kind of an old dialogue, work on a strength or work on a weakness. And you have an opinion about that.
Yeah, and I think this comes back to something deeper that's hard to. So I did some research on this when I was writing in my book to see if it validates my opinion, and there was some supporting evidence. I believe on working on a strength, and I have seen and observed both in the U.S. and abroad when individuals work on a strength, they get better, and it pulls ahead. They pull away from the pack. They get really good at it, and that's their differentiator. When you work on a weakness, you're kind of like making yourself a well-balanced individual, which is good. But if I had to choose between the two, it's work on the strength and let that be your differentiator. You know, when it's like playing Mario Kart or whatever, and you're selecting your car and you choose the wheels for traction and the size for acceleration, all this type of stuff. Mm-hmm. You know, I think if you choose, I don't know, a character, let's say Mario, he's even all the way across. But then you choose Donkey Kong or whatever, and he's got the fastest speed. Mm-hmm. Now he's all over the place, and you got to be skilled to handle it, but he's all over the place. And I think the reps that we can always talk about that have been the number 1 reps in the country, like, you know, Albert Turgeon was a number 1 rep one time. Keith Burkeen up north, who's now with Spinal Simplicity, he was a number 1 rep. Mike Siafi was the number 1 rep. Those are guys that when they measure number 1 rep, it's off of overall revenue, percent of quota, and the percent of growth. And it's a blend of those 3, and they get the number 1 rep of the year award. So it's not always the top salesperson. Mm-hmm. But those individuals I just mentioned, they all had something that was like, no one would say, oh, that's a really well-balanced individual. If anybody knows any of the names of those individuals I just shared, they would laugh. Nope, they're not well-balanced. They're really good at certain stuff. They're talented. They're gifted at certain things. And it's those gifts that made them be the best. So I really believe that best of the best are somebody that really has a differentiator that sets them out and working on a strength. Now, psychologically, Jordan, if you want to get into this, I believe it has to do with because people enjoy working on something that they feel good at or think they're good at. So I believe people don't like to work on a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a psychological component to that. So maybe if somebody had a weakness that they really enjoyed working on for some torturous reason, they would be an outlier in this study or in the studies that I read and that I used to validate my own emotional feelings. What's your take? Because you know a lot of winners that have jumped from company to company.
Yeah, I have. And, I think you're onto something there, because I will say there are weaknesses that are so debilitating that they will eventually hurt a person real bad professionally if they don't get to at least a minimum standard. They have to.
I agree.
Admin work has caught many a rep, in a bad way, getting behind on expense reports and stuff like that. Just to a minimum passable level, it will never be great. And many of the reps that I've known that have put up multiple president's clubs across companies, a lot of them weren't great at it, and they did it enough and they had to block time. One of them told me once, I do everything I hate early in the morning to get it out of the way so it's not hanging over my head all day long. So that way I can get it done and enjoy the day. In that case, that was his admin work that he had to do. And I do think, people, like you said, it's a psychological rhythm. They know they're good at this and they enjoy doing it because they're good at it. And it just kind of becomes a multiplication factor, I think. I know with me, like I look at my desk is a wreck right now. I don't focus on having a clean desk. I focus on results. And my results in my world are placements. That's what I care about. I care a lot about that, a high quality placement. And, at the end of the day, I'll get this desk together someday.
Someday, I love that. Isn't it crazy how expense reports can ruin people's careers? It's
oh yeah, I've seen it.
It's and if there's something I can go back in time, my direct sales manager, I gave him a hard time, and I wish I wouldn't have, but I would get frustrated and like, hey, let me go out and sell. Don't make me do this Excel worksheet. Let me go out and sell. I mean, I I can sell. Or when he was divvying up cadaver lab spots and trying to disperse them amongst the team so everyone had an even chance to bring somebody, I would say, that return on investment is going to be highest with me. I will find you a doctor that will do implants immediately afterwards. I will get the doctor to schedule trials while he's at the cadaver lab. We'll be talking and thinking of patients that he can do it on, where the other reps, they go and then 3-4 months later, the doctor they took to the cadaver lab still isn't doing implants. And I was a good team player, as in the aspect where I would pour in on anybody that wanted help. I would give anything I got. As a senior rep, I would even travel out of my territory to help others cover cases because I wanted to demonstrate and show to them that I'll even leave. I won't send one of my clinical specialists. I'll go. But what I regret and which I wish I would have done differently was with my sales manager, I wish I would have understood his pain points. I would have treated him like a customer and understand his pain points. He's being beat up for these spreadsheets. He's being pushed on for the expense reports. How can I make his life a little easier too?
Yeah.
And I would see lazy reps that would make his life easier. And those reps would get gifts where I felt like I wasn't, even though I was producing, I felt like I was a stepchild. And those other reps, I felt they were lazy and they were being blessed with gifts. And now I understand why.
Yeah.
It's clear as day to me why. So to any of the listeners out there, your manager's he's got pain too.
Yeah.
They say hurt people hurt others. So they're not trying to hurt you, but they're feeling the pain. And so if you can ask them every once in a while, what is it I can do for you to make your life a little easier? That will be repaid at 10 times.
That's true.
Yeah. I
work very closely with my wife in the business, and I've learned over the years that you got to meet people halfway. And yet my desk is an ongoing thing, but there's a proverb, I'll see if I can remember it. Where there are no oxen, the manger is clean, but the crop is brought in by the strength of the ox.
That's good.
And I've used that with her over the years.
That is
And it
good.
just gets out of control and everything's piled up. You pulled out a really great principle here, and you touched on it earlier, but I want to isolate it. And you said sometimes as reps, we are so engrossed in the actions of selling, we do not see the plays we are running. What did you mean by that? And you, in your part of your writing of this book, is to help reps see that.
Yeah, it goes back to what I was recently teaching my class. I'm trying to let the students know that, because we're about to get into some role plays. Southeastern Louisiana University has a sales team, and this week they're having their first internal sales competition, which is just amazing. I love that school. So what I was sharing with some of them that I feel might have some anxiety and might get hyper focused on, they want to close the deal, they want to answer the questions, they want to find the pain. They're trying to. They get hyper focused on what they believe that the task at hand is.
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, you gotta in your heart really feel that you care that the person in front of you has a core issue that you can help. And you want to seek it. We talked about that earlier. You want to really think about that what's their core issue? Because you might find one point, and once you get focused on identifying it and you really believe in your heart that they will be better, then it's like everything else will just fall into play.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll find that the objections will reduce. So when people are being trained on sales processes to overcome objections, I say use an objection as a cognitive trigger that you missed a step early on, that your heart got closed off a little bit to really seeking to find the biggest core issue. Because when you stay true to find the biggest issue, you stay hungry and you keep asking and qualifying and digging and learning. And you can say it. I mean, sometimes you could be honest and say, hey, I feel this device has a good outcome, but I don't know if that'll be the largest benefit to you in your practice. So, I mean, you can be honest about it. You don't have to play games.
Mm-hmm.
You say, if you give me a minute, I want to ask some off the wall questions because I have a feeling that I'm chasing the wrong benefit. Like, I think this might be good for you in this realm, and it might be this. There's very few people that'll get turned off with that comment.
Right.
And that's you staying focused and staying on digging for the core issue. And once you identify the core issue, even if they don't see it yet, now all of a sudden you'll be passionate about showing them the what if, right? Helping them envision that painful scenario, painting a really good picture about, look, I don't mean to be dark, but let me share with you what I think could possibly happen if you never do it. Or let me share a story about somebody else, do a little disassociation and share a story about somebody else and what this happened. So you can find that you'll get a little more brave on what you say and that you won't mind building up the pain. But I feel that comes towards the end. And in my sales process, I call that exploring the emotions. And I think that other sales processes put the cart before the horse, and they get so hyper focused on a predetermined pain and trying to dig and twist the dagger for them to agree, like, hey, isn't this really painful? Isn't this painful? And then sometimes when things are going well, reps are just looking, how can I sell more? And they stop quantifying that. Is there something else that's more beneficial to them? Do I have a different solution? And I think reps get hyper focused on the task at hand, or they start to see an opportunity open up and they want to sell that, but they're not stepping back to realize, and there's so many different scenarios because there's your audience is across so many different sectors, even in neuromodulation, that we could talk about this in different realms. It could be, the Medtronic reps. I think Medtronic reps are not selling the pump enough. I think the intrathecal drug pump is amazing and life-changing for cancer pain patients. And I think it's undersold. And I think some of the Medtronic reps are going the path of least resistance and selling SCS and going after other things, and they're not putting in the time for that. And that's coming from a guy that sold against Medtronic.
Yeah.
Interesting
perspective. Maybe one last thought. And this was, again, there's so much in here, and we can never have enough time to cover all of it. But it's so good, is know your competition. And that's one thing that I find a lot of great reps do, is they want to know who the best reps are inside their company. And then if they're in a competitive situation and one of those great reps is in their territory and they're competing against them, they are thinking about that person a lot, maybe every day. And you kind of went through a scenario that is real life. For you found yourself up against a truly good, even great rep. And it took you some time to figure that person out. Take us through your kind of how are you thinking? I mean, I tell people all the time, you don't want to show up in medical before you're ready for it, because you will literally get your head taken off in terms of your sales career here. These people, this is not what you think or what you, if you're on the outside looking in. This is war, and this is hard stuff. So tell us about that. Tell us about this person you had to go up against.
Yeah, so that's exactly true. There's certain areas in the country that I would not want to go up against some individuals that are just like, I mentioned Robbie. I wouldn't want to go up against Robbie over in Jacksonville, Florida. I wouldn't want to go up against a guy named Jason Malloy.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of the ones in the early days where we were having a conversation. He was telling me everything about the reps in his area. And it was just crazy how well versed he was. He knew where they came from. He knew their limitations. He knew their strengths. It was just amazing. And I took note to that. So I didn't set out to do that. I didn't fully understand it until I was getting beat by this guy, Kevin. And he was good. And I couldn't figure it out. It was like the doctors were looking at him like a consultant.
Mm-hmm.
No one would even talk about like he's the rep. He was a consultant. If there was a change in CMS
Mm-hmm.
reimbursement, he was the first one to go back and tell them about the changes. And not just in spinal cord stimulation or an intrathecal drug pump, but he was going back and telling them about other procedures. I'll never forget one time he told this doctor in Baton Rouge, if you have overhead that connects your MRI suite to the building, it becomes not a standalone unit, whatever. And it's like, how did the guy even know that? Like, how did he know that? Like I'm sitting there dumbfounded. Like, I'm not trained any of this in my initial sales training. So it was just, I started to take note.
Right.
The butt kickings were coming regularly to where it's like, okay, I'm either going to watch tape and learn and obviously I didn't let it go that long. What happened was initially I came out with a grateful heart and I grabbed all the low hanging fruit. So I did good right away. But once I grabbed all the low hanging fruit to break through that bubble and take it to the next level, that's when I really was getting my teeth kicked in by Kevin. And then I started to observe his weakness. He came in and he served the physician. He came in like a consultant. And a lot of the staff, office manager, office receptionist, the nursing staff, they felt like he would walk right past them. And he's a great person. He has a great heart. He didn't mean to do that. But he had a big territory and he was coming in and he was going right to the doctor who he thought was the decision maker. Well, all these nurses and staff, they started telling me about when trials were, when lead pools were, and when he's in the OR and when the doctor would be in and when the doctor is scheduled in shortly, because they wanted me to get the business. And then sure enough, they started calling me on failed trials because so you have a failed trial where the patient wasn't getting great outcomes. And then I would come behind, I would hook up the advanced bionics system to that patient and I would program and I would spend a little bit more time because I had a little bit more free time than him. And I would end up capturing the dermatome the patient needed. And we would talk, they would say, okay, this is taking care of my pain. And then the physician would implant it. And then I started to just chip away at his territory. And I was doing it through outcomes. What he observed is I was doing it through outcomes, but what I was observing was I was finding the hidden decision makers or the influencers that no one paid any attention to. And then when I started getting into the operating room with it's a whole nother staff in the operating room. And I'd come in there and I would ask them, hey, what does Kevin do? I'm like, well, Kevin comes in, he makes sure the room is set up. He makes sure the bed's in the right spot. He makes sure everything's prepped. I mean, he was good. I was like, okay, wow, I didn't know I had to do that. I had no idea. I thought I'd just get to hang out in the hallway and come in and peel a couple stickers and put them on my billing sheet and all was good. I didn't realize that I had to come in and take control of the OR. So he raised my game to the next level. And I owe so much to him because if he wouldn't have kicked my teeth in, I would have probably topped out on my skill level. And then after a couple years, you know this because you probably deal with several reps, you have somewhat success for 3 or 4 years. That kind of seals that rep in. It's hard for that rep to go to the next level. It's almost like they've built that, they formed their bad habits. Yeah. They put the sealant on their skill set.
Their castle.
That's a new one. So I hope that kind of touches on that one.
Yeah. You said a recruiter once made a difference for you, and you wanted to share that story on the podcast. Let's hear about it.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Don Scheel is his name. And this goes back to 1998, 1999. And I was doing mortgage origination, BC lending for people with poor credit, trying to help them out. And I was kind of getting a little bit discouraged. It's a tough market. The interest rates were crazy high. 12.49 was the lowest interest rate we could offer people. But we were trying to do the best because these people had no other options. And after a few years doing that, I wanted to get into pharmaceutical. Don't know why. Didn't really know anybody in pharmaceutical, just heard the buzz about pharmaceutical. So I grab a Yellow Pages. After sending out numerous emails and resumes, not getting any responses back, I grab a Yellow Pages. I'm looking for a headhunter because someone said, oh, you can't get in without a recruiter, without a headhunter is what we called them back in the day. So I find Scheel Personnel in Mandeville, Louisiana, Don Scheel. So I fax him remember that fax? I fax him my resume. I follow up the next day and I get a hold of Mr. Don. He answers the phone. He says, how can I help you? And I was like, well, I faxed you my resume. He goes, I don't have a resume. And I said, sir, I faxed you my resume yesterday around lunchtime. And he goes, no. I said, what do you do? And I said, mortgage origination. He goes, oh, I think I know what I did with it. I said, okay. He goes, I threw it away. And I said, excuse me? He goes, yeah, here it is. And I could hear him. I mean, I wasn't there, but I could hear it over the phone of him trying to uncrumple it on the side of his desk, so you knew like he crumbled in a ball and threw it away. I could just hear that noise of uncrumpling. He goes, yeah, this is the worst resume I ever seen. And I said, why? And he started explaining why it was the worst resume he'd ever seen. I said, sir, can I come see you? And he says, no, there's no need. I said, please let me come see you. And he goes, fine. You know where I'm at? I said, yes, sir, I have your address right here. And he goes, well, don't dress up because I'm not. So I dressed up anyways. I showed up. And he was an older gentleman. He had been the man in New Orleans and along what we call the North Shore for years, placing people back into the old companies, Bayer and all the early pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies. So I'm standing at the doorway and I'm saying, hey, Mr. Don, it's Travis. And he goes, I'll never forget. He took his glasses. He's older. So at this time, he's about 75. And he lowers his glasses and looks at me and goes, boy, you're a lot better looking than your resume. And I didn't know how to take it. But I was loving his honesty and just his openness because I really felt like he was going to let me know what I'm missing. And no one else was telling me what I needed to hear. So I come and I sit down with him, and sure enough, there's my resume in front of him all crumpled up. And I offered him a new one that wasn't crumpled. And he says, no, this one's got character. He says, that's about the only thing this has. So he starts showing me everything. We start discussing and talking. Well, we hit it off. And he goes, I'm going to get you a job. He goes, your resume does not reflect you at all. I'm going to get you a job. And soon enough, he put me in front of I forget the name of the company. It was a pharmaceutical company. And I'll never forget the car that I was going to get. I was going to get an Intrepid, Dodge Intrepid. I was like, I get a car? And he goes, yes, sir. I started interviewing for it. I make it down to the finals. It's me and an LSU cheerleader. And I get to the finals and Don says, look, I don't want you to get this job. I got a device company I want you to sell. And I'm confused. I'm like, what do I do? He goes, just go for it. You're probably not going to get it anyways. The cheerleader's probably going to beat you out. So I go in the interview and I'm trying to get it. I wish I tell you that I was taking his advice, but I'm competitive and I was trying to get the job and I didn't get it. She got it. When I came back to him, he says, good. We didn't want you. I wanted you to get the practice. And he says, this is the next company I want you to get. And he put me in front of a capital equipment company called Inviva Research, selling capital equipment, selling OR monitors, an MRI compatible patient monitor, telepack, central station for nurses, and selling monitors into the neonatal ICU to these little babies that are not doing so well. Got the job, loved it, but it was a lot of travel. And the company, we were up against Siemens, GE, and Hewlett-Packard. I'm not sure if you've heard of those companies, but we were in Vivo, no name recognition. And our device, we were having a lot of out-of-box failures. Central stations would go down, a lot of issues. So some fraternity brothers talked me into going to be an Edward Jones broker, and I left. And Don Scheel said, don't do it. I said, Don, I'm going to stay home and, make a lot of money. He goes, no, don't do it. He goes, you have a place in medical, stay. And I was like, it's hard to travel. The device is tough to sell. I'm not getting referrals because I can't get the places that I install them. They won't give me referrals or be references because they're not having success with our equipment. So he said, so against his better judgment, against his mentoring, I became an Edward Jones broker. I did, by all measurements, I was leading the pack. I was doing great. Edward Jones, you have to open up so many accounts and have so many millions of dollars under investment before you get your own office. So I was out there knocking on doors. I knocked on over 3,000 doors. And while you're knocking on doors, you're also studying for the Series 7 and 6. So I became a Series 7 licensed stockbroker, 63, so I can sell insurance, life insurance, and annuities. Yet I'm making about 20,000 the first year, 24,000 the second year, but they're telling me I'm doing great. And I'll never forget my wife. We just had our first son. This is about 2003. And my wife holds up a check, Jordan, and she says, "This one's not going to clear." I felt like a failure. I went through our savings from the company before. I went against Don, who I just thought the world of and was so grateful for his mentoring early in my career. And we're going to bounce a check. Like, I just felt like an embarrassment. I had my wife go on this journey of a new career path when everything was doing wonderful. So I call up Don the next day and I was like, "Don, I want back in." And he had a few words for me, rightfully so. "I told you, boy, I told you." And we went back and forth. And I was like, "Don, I know, I'm sorry." He goes, I would have had you. And he was naming other companies that he would have had me placed in. And I said, "I know, Don." And he goes, "I just placed somebody for this new company for spinal cord stimulation." I said, "What's that, Don? That sounds great. I'll take that." He goes, "No, you didn't hear me. I just placed somebody." I said, "Perfect." He goes, "Boy, what are you, deaf? I told you someone's already got the job." He goes, it was Chuck Gross. And he said, because what I did was I referred Chuck to Don for my old job as I was leaving. So Chuck got the job for Advanced Phonics at the time. And I said, "Oh, Don, you have to know Don." Because, I mean, everybody was loyal to Don. He looked out for everybody. He took care of everybody. He was he was like the godfather for all of us. And I said, "Oh, Don, do you know the manager?" And he says, "Yeah, I know the manager." I said, "How well?" He goes, "I placed him at US Surgical." I said, "Good, you'll get me an interview?" And again, having fun with him. He's like, "Boy, you are not listening to me." And I said, "Oh, Don, he's not loyal." I said, "I'll get you an interview. You're not getting the job." So he got me an interview with, it was Michael Doherty at the time. And I got in front of Michael and I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. And I put it out there. And I ended up talking him into splitting the territory. So got on, and it wasn't just me interviewing. It was Don pulling strings because he did have an influence over Mike and they were good friends, and Don put out there for me. But ever since then, anytime I'd get frustrated, I'd go see Don after I got on with Advanced Phonics and he'd tell me, "No, stay where you're at. I'm not placing you again." And it was wisdom. He was kind of like that father figure, but he knew the industry.
Sure.
My father gives me great advice, but he's not in the industry. And, it's just, I feel like a little bit of that is lost nowadays because what you do, Jordan, you make a difference. What you and your brother do in the business that you guys have is so important. You give people first chances, but more importantly than that, Jordan, you and your brother, you guys give people second chances. You give people chances for redos. Maybe they don't do well. They get put on a performance plan, they get let go, but you just have a feeling about them. And you believe that in a different organization, a different culture, they would be a shooting star. And you help them with your mentoring and knowing people and knowing personalities. You help place those types of people where they would be a better fit. Because you can be a failure in one company, go to another company and be a shooting star.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people like you and your brother, you help identify that.
Yep.
And, Don in my life was so impactful. When I got on with Advanced Phonics, anybody we found around the country that wanted in, we would run them through Don. One, because he would mentor them and coach them on interviewing. But also, we took pride in helping pay off his house. So he was older. And I'll never forget the day we must have sent him, I don't know, maybe 30 people. And back then the checks, his commission for placing someone was fairly substantial. And I'll never forget the call when he called and said he paid off his house because we all took ownership in that. We were all participating with him to help him achieve his goal as a payback for what he did for us. So, yeah. And then he recently passed away. And It's just people take it for granted, the recruiters and the job placements. And then corporations are starting to try to do it themselves. And there's just that missing feeling and guidance and just genuineness that is no longer there. And I hope there's a turn in the marketplace where it goes back towards your direction.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you for the kind words. And My brother Julian does a great job, a really, really good job. I always hear from people that have interacted with him. And obviously, it's great to hear about that gentleman that made a tremendous difference in your life and your family's life. And it's an honor that we get to do it. I tell Julian that a lot because people trust us. And I think we work hard to earn that, but they've still got to trust us. And so it is an honor. Thank you for coming and sharing your expertise with us on the podcast today. I hope you'll come back. Can we extend the invitation right now for you to come back someday?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You've had some amazing guests. So I don't know what should be our measurement for me beating them, because I love some of the people you have, and I would love to beat them. So I don't know if it's repeat visits will be the score, the measurement we use, or if it's listens or likes. But yeah.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. For me, the big thing is value add to the audience. I want to help them, in the words of Donald Miller, I want to help them survive and I want to help them thrive. And you've done both today. Thank you so much for being on, Travis.
You are welcome. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on the Chase MedSearch podcast. I hope that you gained some helpful insight from today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and give us a like on your favorite streaming platform. It really helps grow our audience. For more information on Chase MedSearch, visit our website at chasemedsearch.com. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, I'm Jordan Chase, and this has been the Chase MedSearch podcast.